Hey guys, I'm George Johnson and I'm a digital content producer for Wex Photo Video. I'm also a filmmaker and a videographer, and I've been doing so for many years. I've worked across narrative film, documentary film, experimental, I've directed the odd music video, and I've worked in loads and loads of corporate settings such as events filming, promotional filming, and then of course for Wex I do my fair share of camera reviews and equipment reviews as well. So hopefully I've got a broad enough knowledge, I've dipped my toes in enough little pools of water to give you guys a quick summary into an introduction to filmmaking for photographers. Now obviously as a photographer there's a lot of stuff you are going to already know, but there's also I think probably a fair few things that you might not be so sure about or you might not have come across before, because although they are very similar mediums, they are also fairly different. So let's just crack on and start off with my first thing I've got to talk about. And that is the story. The story is always what film and actually photography as well are all about, but the way you tell those stories are somewhat different. So of course with photography, we have one single image and you've got to tell a story just throughout that one image, which I actually think is really, really difficult because you haven't got the ability to play with any extra elements. You've really just got to get it all in that one composition. Now with film, it's a little bit different to that because we have the ability to use motion, but most importantly, I think anyway, we have the ability to use editing. Therefore, you can obviously piece many, many shots together to tell your story, which means that actually you don't need to get it all in this one image, and you can sort of hopefully take somebody on a journey as they watch your film or your video or whatever your content you're creating. So how do we do that? How do we tell that story? Well, again, similar to photography, you want to have a clear intent before you start out, because I think that for me is something that's really, really important. And it doesn't really matter what that intent is, whether it is to create a promo for a company to drive sales or to create a documentary to shed some light on some really serious issues. I actually think you've still got to know exactly what the intention of your video is. Why are we making it? Who do we want to see it? Because once you start thinking about that, then you can start sort of like visualizing the film in your head and understanding exactly how you want it to be. So for me, that's something really, really important to think about. As fun as it is to just go and grab your camera and just go shoot some stuff, really knowing exactly what you're looking for and having an idea in your head will hopefully take you a little bit further and maybe actually take you closer to getting the goals and the content you want to create. Now, something that can really help with that is using shot lists, because they can help you even further visualize where you want to take your piece. So similar to photography as well, I'm sure you guys do it, where you visualize your image, you sort of have an idea of what you want it to look like, maybe compositionally. Do the same with video, but with video, don't just do it for one image, do it with all of your images. So think, okay, so I'm going to this business and I want to make a promotional video for this shop, let's say. So there's certain shots that I'm going to have in my head in a shot list that I want to capture. I want to get a shot of the outside of the shop to show people where it is and the location. I want to maybe get some shots of the staff members looking all happy and smiling and like doing their job. And I want to get some product shots to show off the stuff that they have in the shop. Now, obviously this is a really basic example, but knowing this before I get there and going, okay, right, in my head, I've got these things I want to get and these things that I'm looking for, then you can essentially go there and tick all of those boxes. Then once you've gone there and you've ticked those boxes and I've gotten all of the shots that I think are essential and the ones that I'm really, really looking for, then that's maybe where you get a little bit more room to be a bit more creative. You can start thinking about shots that you might not have thought about before and you're just seeing in the moment, and getting the stuff that is maybe more the beauty shots or the more fun stuff, because you know that you've already got the bare bones of your video set and done. Much like your shot list, you also want to visualize your edit, and actually the shot list just helps with this so much because you can sort of think about the pacing of your video. That's really, really important. So how fast is this video going to be? How many shots am I going to use? Am I going to cut it really, really quickly to make it a really engaging, eye-catching piece? Or is it going to be a bit slower? Maybe it's going to have like a slightly more relaxed tone. Because if you're thinking about your edit before you go into your shoot, you'll probably get better footage because you know exactly what you're looking for. I know if I want a fast-paced edit, I need to just get loads and loads and loads of shots. Whereas if I am having a slower paced, more relaxed edit, then I'm able to just make sure that the shots I am getting are really, really good and focus on those rather than going out and getting 30 different shots that I'm not going to use. So visualizing your edit and using your shot list and your intent that you've thought about, that all sort of go hand in hand. And that for me is like, that's the building blocks. Before you even get on the shoot, before you pick up the camera, I'd really recommend you guys think about this stuff, because for me, I found that when I do this, my videos will have a much bigger impact than otherwise. So now we have an idea of what we're looking to achieve and some of the things we can do before we even start, shooting or anything to help with the shoot. But now I think it's time to just cover a few things that you guys might not have experienced before because you've largely worked in photography that just doesn't come up as much. And the first thing I want to talk about is NTSC versus PAL. You may have seen this before when you configure your camera for the first time. It will sometimes ask you, do you want to be in the NTSC or PAL format? And actually all cameras will have this in their settings, so you can go and have a look at that if you want. And it's basically one or the other. So what's the difference? Well, I'm not going to go into all of the differences because it would just take ages and we don't have time for that in the video. But there is one key difference which is really, really important. And that's that they both shoot at different frame rates. So when you shoot in NTSC, you actually shoot at a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. Whereas if you shoot in PAL, you shoot at 25 frames per second. And if you try to mix those two, it's basically just not going to work, and it just creates so many problems for you in your edit, because you're essentially just like, when you output the video file, you're going to output it as either one or the two, so then the other footage will be playing back at the wrong frame rate and you'll just have loads and loads of issues. So it's really important to make sure you know which one you want to be shooting in. NTSC is generally used in America, whereas PAL is generally used in Europe. So dependent on where you are and who you're making the video for, that's what I would really consider. If I was, even though I'm in Europe, so I always shoot in PAL, which is 25 frames a second, if I was to make a video for an American client, I actually probably would try and shoot it in NTSC, because then if they go and they want to mix that video in with all of their other videos that they've had other people making content for, it just works for them. But if you're in Europe, then always use PAL, because that's just kind of like the general standard recording format. So if you've ever wondered what that is on your camera, hopefully that explains it for you. And also, if you've ever seen in spec lists for cameras, sometimes you'll see they can shoot at, let's say 4K 30p and 4K 60p and 120p. And then you've wondered why that is the case because you've never shot in it. That's because that's for NTSC and that's the way we give out specs. Therefore, if you're in Europe, it's actually very unlikely you'll ever use that 30p, 60p and 120p. You're much more likely to be shooting in 25, 50 or 100. It's just the way that we give out the specs. I know it's a little bit confusing, but just don't worry about that. You just have to sort of do a little bit of maths in your head. While I'm on the topic of frame rates, I just want to talk quickly about what they are. So for example, we watch our videos in Europe at 25 frames a second. So if you have a camera that is able to shoot in 50 frames a second, then you can do that, and that basically just means that you can then slow the clip down 50%, and then that's where we get our slow-mo from. Same goes for 100p, 200p, all of that stuff. So if you go and look at your camera and it says it can shoot in 4K, 25 and 50p for example, then that means that you can shoot in 4K and still get 50% slow-mo if you want it, which is pretty cool. Now, along with frame rates, in video comes shutter speed. Now, obviously, as you guys know, shutter speed controls the amount of motion blur in your image and also the amount of light that's being let into the sensor. Now, in photography, this is really cool because you can use it for artistic expression, of course. So you can do long exposures, or you can shoot at really high shutter speeds if you want to get action shots. And you can basically use that for controlling the light, but also just for controlling the motion blur. Unfortunately, in video, we don't have as much flexibility and we're not able to use shutter speed for as much artistic expression and control as photographers. And the reason for this is what I'm going to explain now. So the general rule of thumb is you always want to shoot your shutter speed at double your frame rate. So if I'm filming something at 25 frames a second, then I always want to have my shutter speed set to 1/50th of a second. And the reason for this is because it just gives your image like the typical amount of motion blur. Because all people that shoot video generally follow this rule, it basically means that everybody has a similar amount of motion blur in their video, which is what we're used to seeing. Therefore, if you were to differ from that and say shoot at a shutter speed that is less than double your frame rate, there'll be like loads and loads of motion blur in your image. and it just won't look natural. It will feel strange. And the vice versa goes for the opposite as well. So if you shoot at a shutter speed that is over double your frame rate, say I'm filming at 25p and my shutter's at 1/100th of a second instead of 1/50th, then there really won't be much motion blur to the image at all, which will just feel unnatural. It will sort of look slightly robotic and a bit weird. So because basically it's a kind of a weird rule, but the reason we follow this rule is because everybody does, if that makes sense. Therefore, when you watch videos, you're always watching them and they've always been shot in double the shutter speed of the frame rate. So it's just a general rule of thumb. But as you can imagine, it actually can be quite difficult for filmmakers because we lose that control of exposure that photographers have. But what happens if, as a filmmaker, you're outside, it's a really gorgeous, really beautiful day, full of light, you're at your minimum ISO, and it's just too overexposed because you want to shoot it at a shallow depth of field. You don't want to stop it up to f22 to control the exposure. Well, what are you going to do? Well, then you need one of filmmakers' best friends, which is the ND filter. Of course, ND filters are also used in photography, often used for long exposures and stuff like that, but filmmakers use them all the time because if a lot of photographers, were they in that situation, they could just up their shutter speed. It would control the exposure, bring it down, which would enable them to shoot that image at a low ISO with a nice shallow depth of field. But because we can't change that shutter speed, we need to just basically go and chuck as many ND filters as are necessary on front of the lens to control that light. Now, while I'm on the subject of things photographers like to do, but videographers generally don't so much, I want to talk about autofocus, because autofocus is not really widely used in video. And the reason for it is, well, it's partly for a few reasons actually. So one of the main reasons, which is becoming less so nowadays, is just because autofocus wasn't really good enough for video before. Often there would be hunting, so if I was to use autofocus now, maybe if I'm sat here, because I'm sat here the whole time, it would be okay. But often it will be hunting, so it kind of is trying to find the focus. Like often like when you half hold down your shutter on your photography camera and it kind of does that hunting thing, it does it while you're filming video, which obviously is extremely distracting and not something you want. So that is becoming less of a problem nowadays because some of the cameras that are coming out these days have insane autofocus, but we still do generally favor manual focus, and that's just because of the control it gives us. Filmmakers often like to do things like focus pulls. So, you know, say going from something from in the foreground of the image and then focus pulling to the background. And while you could use autofocus to that and set it to go from one to the other, it's generally preferred by filmmakers to do it manually just because you get all of the control when you're going from one to the other. So you can set the speed and just basically make sure that it's exactly how you want it to be. Just to give you an idea of how obsessed with like having this manual focus and having all of this control is to filmmakers, on big movie sets and stuff like that, they actually have somebody on set called a focus puller, and their entire job is just to pull focus for the cameraman and make sure that they hit their points and do it right. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about and how into this kind of stuff a lot of people are. Now I've covered a couple of the differences between video and photo and just some of the ways we use some of the tools to our disposal. I now want to talk about sound and editing, because of course sound and editing is not something you're going to come across as a photographer. And I don't mean like editing the image and like color correcting it and stuff like that. I mean specifically editing and placing shots next to each other in your timeline. In my opinion, sound is probably the most overlooked part of filmmaking, and actually for me, if I was to watch, say, a student film or somebody who's new to making videos, I think often the way you can determine and realize that this is a student film is because of the sound and it not being a full, complete sound design. It's just something that is often a little bit overlooked, so it's something I'm really, really excited to cover right now. Now, I'm not really going to go into any software stuff and how to use software because there's so many videos out there on YouTube that cover it, and to be honest, we just don't have the time to get into that, otherwise this will very quickly become a really boring software tutorial video. So I'm just going to talk about a few theory bits, but I would just like to say that when it comes to sound design, it's often about experimentation. So again, it can be quite hard to cover anyway, because often it's about going, finding all these sounds. There's loads of websites that you can go and find free sounds. My favorite one is freesound.org. I'll leave a link to it in the description if you do want to check that out. But there's loads of different sites where you can go get free sounds, or of course you can go out and record your own. And then it's often a case of just playing around with it in the edit, seeing where these sounds are going to fit, where they're going to work, how loud you want them in the mix, whether you want to put any effects on them. But it's a really, really creative part of the process, and it's really, really fun. And the way that it can completely transform a video is astounding. Even something as simple as just like having a shot of somebody walking through a street. All right, it's cool if you use the actual audio of just them walking through a street, but if you go and you find little bits of chatter coming through the microphone, and you go and you find, say somebody's wearing heels on this street, and you find this really nice clean sound effect of that heel hitting the pavement and stuff like that, and maybe just like a sirens going by in the distance, it really creates this whole environment which it just makes it feel really realistic and like you're immersed in the moment. So I won't go into it loads, but it's a really, really important part of the process, so definitely something worth thinking about. One thing that is really easy for me to cover, and I will tell you about now, is microphones, because obviously this is a bit of kit that you guys as photographers just have never needed before. So there are several different types of microphone, and I'm just going to run through some of them for you now, and then you can figure out which one might be suited to you. There are two types of microphones that filmmakers, or new filmmakers, will generally use. One of them is called shotgun microphones. Now these range from those tiny little mics that you can just pop on top of your camera, all the way through to these massive microphones you might have seen from movie sets and stuff, where they're on a really big boom pole and they're maybe like this big, and they've got like a big dead cat looking thing over the top of them. And they'll come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they also come in all sorts of directions, and this is something that's really, really important to consider. So some microphones you might buy might be incredibly directional. So if I point it over here, it's going to capture the noise that is directly over there. It's not going to get any stuff over here or here. Whereas some of the microphones you can buy are not particularly directional. So I can just pop it here and it will capture the whole sort of noise print in front of it. This is something that's really, really important to consider. Why are you buying this microphone? What are you looking to record with it? Are you looking to isolate that sound and just capture one person's audio? Because then what you need to do is you need to buy one that's very directional. Or are you buying it maybe to record some Atmos, maybe you're on a busy street or you're in the woods or whatever, and you just want to get that general woods or street or whatever ambience, then make sure that you check out how directional the microphone is. It's really, really important. I'd actually recommend maybe watching some reviews or reading about it online just to see what people have said. Have a listen to the microphone yourself and see what you think before you buy anything. You can also get lapel mics. Lapel mics are what I'm using right now. So they're often cool because they're generally wireless, so you can just pop your transmitter in your pocket and then you can wander around. And they're really good for documentary. That's generally where they're used because their main purpose is for isolating one person's audio at a time. So when we go out and we do camera reviews and stuff and we're on the streets and stuff, we don't want to capture the entire street's audio, we just want to capture our voice because that's the bit that's most important. So they're really, really good for on-the-go filmmakers and documentaries and stuff like that. It's also worth noting that they are only good at capturing one person's voice at a time. So even if there was somebody sat next to me right here, if I just had one lapel mic on and we were trying to capture both our audio, they would sound a lot worse than me because they do have this short range. That's why you put them so close to your mouth. So it's worth noting that if you want to record more than one person's audio at a time, lapel mics are still a good way to go, but you're going to need two of them. So now you know some of the basic types of microphones, you can think about which ones are going to be right for your production and which ones you might want to invest in. I do also want to talk about camera mics. Camera mics, while most cameras do have mics and they are a worthy backup, they can be used, they generally just don't sound that good. I'm actually using a camera mic to film myself as well as this lapel mic. I've got it as a backup. So I'm just going to switch to it here, and now you can hear me on the camera microphone and you can just hear that it's just not going to have as good audio. It is usable in a pinch, but I certainly would never want to rely on it. I wouldn't consider it professional audio myself, but it definitely can be used as a really worthy backup because if everything goes wrong, at least you have some camera audio. But personally, I would definitely recommend investing in a microphone because I think it makes a massive difference. Now, when you're recording sound, how loud should you be recording it? It's a very interesting question. And there is a general rule to this, and that's that you generally want to be recording around -12 decibels. This is because it allows you a little bit of wiggle room so that if you do go a little bit louder and I start talking a little bit louder, then I'm still not going to get peaking and distortion, because distortion is basically when you're too loud and it just sounds awful and your actual audio goes funny because it's pushed too far. And of course, you don't want to record it too quiet either, because if you're recording it too quiet, then when you're in the edit, you have to push the sound up. But as you push the sound up, you're essentially stretching it, which means that you're going to lose quality as well. So -12 is pretty much the sweet spot for trying to record your like average bit of audio. And then when you do your mix, it's the same for your mix. So you want to mix to around -12 decibels. So it's cool if you're doing something like this, like what I'm doing, because I'm just going to try and record myself at -12 decibels. And then I don't actually have to do too much mixing to that. I can just output it at -12 decibels. But say if I was recording background sounds, like I went to go film a woods because there was a scene in the woods, I'll record it at -12 decibels, but then when I'm in the mix, I'd obviously mix it down because I wouldn't want the woods to be as loud as my characters speaking and stuff, because then you just wouldn't be able to hear them. So always record at -12 decibels, and then have the peak of your mix, the most interesting, the bit that you really want people listening to of your mix, at around -12, and then you can mix the other stuff down below that, around that mix, just to see what sounds good. Another thing to think about when recording sound is the environment. What's the environment like you're filming in? Maybe go there and have a listen beforehand, because there's always going to be things that might catch you out. For example, if you're filming inside, the noise of a generator, the buzz of a fridge, the buzz of aircon, fans, stuff like that, you might not really be thinking about and notice before, but it can cause massive issues to your audio if there's just like a buzz going on the entire time. It's really distracting. Or say if you're filming outside and you're actually filming on like a plane route, so there's loads of planes going overhead all the time, it can be really, really frustrating. So it's just worth thinking about that before. Even if you find the perfect location, I would always recommend going to that location and just checking it out first, because it might actually not be a viable one sound-wise. Okay, so I think that will do for sound for the minute. So now I want to talk quickly about editing. Now again, I'm not going to go into programs and software and stuff, because I just don't think we have the time for that and it wouldn't really be relevant to this video. But you can always go and check out stuff and find out how to use all the different bits of software, because there's plenty out there and it's super, super fun to use. But I just want to talk about some more theory stuff quickly. So obviously editing is such a powerful tool to filmmakers. It's one of the most important parts of the process, and it's one that can really make or break your film. Now, I actually took part in an exercise bunch, which I'd just quickly like to tell you about, which I thought was so interesting, which is me and 30 other people were all given the same footage, one scene from a movie, and we were asked to edit it. And just to see, as a social experiment, just to see what the differences and similarities between our edits were. We then all edited it, and we all sat down and watched everybody's edit one by one. And it was just honestly unbelievable. The pacing and just the way that each edit felt was just so different from one another, that it really just showed me the power of editing, and the fact that 30 different people can take the same footage, same stuff, and create such different videos with completely different tones, completely different feels, just through editing. So it was a really, really powerful exercise for me, and just showed me how much control I can have on the edit, and how actually you can really bring your own spin to your edit and stuff, which makes it really, really fun and creative. Now, editing is all about pacing, so it's always good to know what kind of pace you're going for when you cut. Are you going for a slow pace, fast pace? Are you going to have sort of like a bit of both, you know, maybe you're going to go in waves or something? It's really good to know about that before you start editing, because you can just sort of like get that in your mind. It's really important to visualize this stuff for me. But I do just want to give you a couple bits of advice for editing. And my first bit of advice is always leave wiggle room when you film. That means that in every shot, always make sure that you hit record 2 or 3 seconds early and stop hitting record maybe 4 or 5 seconds late in every single shot. Because sometimes when you get in the edit, you just need a little bit of breather room that you didn't anticipate you actually would need when you're on the shoot. So always make sure it's there, because honestly, when it's not there, it hurts so much. When you're there and you're like, oh, I'd really just love to like run this shot 3 seconds later or something, because it'll actually give it a bit of impact. The character's just left the shot, let's say, and they've just walked out shot, and actually, rather than instantly cutting and moving on to the next thing, you kind of just want that beat, that quick second, just to sit there and everyone can just sort of like take it in. When you don't have it, it's really, really annoying. So I'd always recommend to be thinking about that while you're filming, and just be aware of it and leave that little bit of extra space. Don't rush these things. So your shot list can really, really help with your edit, because it essentially is making an edit before you've even shot anything, because you kind of get the idea of the pacing and the flow and the way things are going to move from one another. But I would just give this one bit of advice, and that is don't get too stuck in the shot list. Still use that creativity, work with what you've got. So if you had this idea of doing this amazing thing in your shot list before you were filming, and then you get into your edit and it's just not working, then don't be afraid to scrap it. You know, that's what good editing is. It's not just like mindlessly following out the ideas that you had before. It's approaching every situation creatively and seeing what you can do with it. I also would give the bit of advice that you never know when you're wrong, if that makes sense. Because when you're editing is a really intense process. You know, you're often there for many hours at a time, just really intensely watching the same stuff over and over and over again. And you can kind of almost get a bit stuck in your head and it just gets a bit loopy. And then it gets to a point where it feels wrong to do anything different because you've watched your clips so many times play out in one certain way that then someone else will come in and they'll suggest that I make a change, or they'll suggest that I do a certain thing. And I've definitely been in these situations where I'll think in my head, you're totally wrong. Like, I don't agree with that suggestion whatsoever because this is the way I've been making it and this is the way I like it. But I would always recommend to give that a go because the amount of times I've thought to myself, do you know what, you're completely wrong, I completely disagree with that a bit of advice you just gave me, but I'm going to give it a go. Partly to prove that I'm right maybe, but also just because that's the nature of filmmaking. It's a collaborative process and you should be listening to other people. You don't want to get too stuck in your own head. And honestly, there have been many, many times where I've gone and made that change and been like, do you know what? You were completely right. And I just couldn't see that because I was too close to the art, too close to the process. It's definitely something that you'll have in photography as well. That same kind of issue of being so invested and so close to the thing that you're making, that you almost can't really see the bigger picture and it becomes difficult to be an audience member and you become more of a filmmaker. So be aware of that, and when your friend tells you to cut that shot, rather than just tell them they're wrong and swear at them or whatever, give it a go, and then at least you can make an informed decision and know that you're making the right choice. So now I've covered some of the other stuff about editing, I just want to tell you about a few different types of cuts because they really, really help to think about like from an early point in the process. So the first type of cut I want to talk about is the most boring and basic one. It's the hard cut, and that literally just means cutting from one shot to the next. No effects, no fancy business, just a hard cut. The next cut I want to talk about is the match cut. This is probably actually my favorite cut out of all of them, and this is essentially finding two different compositions that are very similar compositionally and then cutting them together. So, I don't know, let's say for example, I've got a shot of an orange, right? Like a big orange fruit, and it's right in the center of my shot right here. And then what I want to do is I want to cut to a shot of the earth. And I'll frame my shot of the earth to be exactly the same as the orange. So then as you're watching it, it kind of feels really cohesive and you can go from this orange to the earth like really, really smoothly and nicely. So this is a good one. It's actually often used for transitioning between two scenes for that exact reason, because the similarness in the composition and the fact that your eye is looking in the same place and then looking at something really similar kind of smooths out the scene transition. So if you're going from one place to another, it just makes it feel a little bit more cohesive and gives it a really nice flow. The next one is jump cuts, and you're probably familiar with jump cuts. YouTubers use them all the time. A jump cut would be something like this. This is a jump cut, or this is also a jump cut, or this. A jump cut basically is just where you keep the camera static and you hold your composition, but the things in your composition move around so that the time is passing, and it's kind of like almost like quite shocking. They used to really be quite rarely used and were quite a shocking thing, but now with the popularity of YouTube, people really, really love jump cuts nowadays, so you're probably very, very familiar with these already. Another really cool type of cut which actually incorporates sound design are called J and L cuts. And what they are is, say if I have one shot of something and then the audio will start playing from the shot I'm about to cut to, if that makes sense. So say I'm here talking now, and then all of a sudden we filter in some jungle noise, and then I cut to a shot of the jungle, then that's called a J cut, and an L cut is the reverse. So an L cut would be if I'm still talking, and then we cut to a shot of the jungle while I'm still talking over it. So these are actually often used in narrative film for narrators. So it's quite a cool effect where you've probably seen it in films, where there's a shot of something, and then all of a sudden this narration starts happening, and then what they'll do is they'll then cut to the person saying that narration, and you'll realize it's not really narration at all. It's actually somebody speaking in a scene in the film, rather than it being like a completely separate bit of voiceover. So there's a lot of really cool, clever ways you can use these, but actually one of the most common ways I tend to use them is just for creating that smoothness. So if I'm going from one location to another in my video, then I might slowly filter in the sound of that location I'm about to go to, so that when we go there, it's almost like the audience are like ready for it, if that makes sense. So they're a really nice one just to really give your edit a nice bit of flow. So cutting on motion is also a technique that's really widely used by editors, and that is essentially cutting while somebody is moving. So say if there's a scene in your film and there's somebody stood stationary and then they start walking. A very common way of doing that would be to wait until that person takes one step and then you cut on that motion, so that leg moves from here out to here, and then when you move to your next shot, it keeps going, rather than to have that person stationary, then you cut shot and then they start walking. It just kind of makes it feel a little bit more cohesive and just gives it a nice flow. You can also cut on motion in terms of camera motion. So say for example, if I was doing a pan and then I cut and the next shot I'm doing is also panning at a same speed or a similar rate, then it again can feel quite nice. It just feels really cohesive and it's quite a cool effect. When you're cutting, something I'd really encourage you to think about is eye lines. Where is the eye line of your viewer? So say I've got a composition and the most interesting bit of the frame, the bit I want them to be looking at, is left of screen. Then a really good thing to do is to cut to another shot where the interesting thing is also left of screen, because then it means that my eye's already on the left of the screen, so then when we cut, I'm still looking there and I'm instantly looking at the thing you want me to be looking at, rather than if the composition is interestingly left of screen on the first shot and then on the second shot you cut to it being right of screen, because then I have this little period of time where I'm then looking around the screen trying to find the interesting composition and focus my eye on the bit I want it to be focused on. So it's really nice if you can sort of think about that while you're editing and sort of be aware of where the audience eyes are and where you want to take them, because it can kind of take you out of that immersiveness if you are left with that kind of, even that split second of just your eyes darting around the screen trying to find out where you're meant to be looking. So to conclude, all of the stuff I've mentioned in this video are literally just guidelines. You can break all of these rules if you want to, but I think it's really important to know these rules and then understand why you're breaking them. So hopefully this video was useful for you, but by all means, go and ignore everything I've said and go and create your masterpiece. These are just some of the building blocks you can use to like help build your tower or whatever, but it's entirely up to you in terms of how you want to use them. Now, there is only so much you can learn through watching videos and reading online. So what I would say is go out there and make movies. And do you know what? Go out there and totally mess up and just make a terrible movie. I've done that plenty of times. I've made some really bad videos in the past, and they're the ones that have taught me the most, you know, because I've gone out there and I've made mistakes and then I've gone, do you know what? That hurts me, that frustrates me, and now I never want to do that again. So then when I go and I make my next video, I'm thinking about that and I'm aware of it and I go, no, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And that's how you progress as a filmmaker. And I actually think it's such a fun, rewarding process, and I really hope you guys are going to enjoy it too. I am aware I've like literally hardly touched the tip of the iceberg that is filmmaking, because there's just so much we could talk about. I could easily sit here and make a 6-hour-long video about this, but I'm not sure that anybody could easily sit there and watch it. So what I'm going to do is I've got 10 minutes at the end of this video, which I'm just going to leave blank, and I'm going to leave open for questions. So if you want to ask me any questions, or the rest of our team, because the rest of our WEX content team will also be on the chat as well. If you want to ask us any questions about anything I've covered or just anything whatsoever, I'd really love to answer them for you. So this is your time, please ask away. And I'd just like to say thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video.